U.S. President Donald Trump says he will now impose a 50% tariff on copper imports. He made the declaration at a cabinet meeting in Washington, but it's unclear.
I believe the tariff on copper, we're going to make it 50%.
50%.
What he's doing there, Kelly, is he's going through all of those investigations that have been ongoing into sectoral tariffs.
The moment President Trump's pen hit paper on July 10th, copper prices exploded like a bomb detonating on Wall Street. Within seconds of his signature on the Section 232 proclamation, New York copper futures rocketed past $5.95 per pound, a price never before witnessed in the history of commodities trading.
U.S. President Donald Trump has confirmed in writing his plans for a 50% tariff on all copper imports into his country.
Traders watching their screens couldn't believe their eyes as the metal surged 13% in a single session, the steepest one-day rise ever recorded. But this wasn't just another market fluctuation. This was economic warfare, and Canada found itself directly in the crosshairs. The 50% tariff on imported copper, set to take effect August 1st, sent shockwaves through boardrooms from Toronto to Beijing. For Canada, which ships $9.3 billion worth of copper annually with over half destined for American factories, this was nothing short of an existential threat. The timing couldn't have been more brutal. Canadian miners had just invested billions in expanding production specifically to meet U.S. demand. Within hours of the announcement, the price gap between New York and London copper markets blew open to an unprecedented $1,600 per metric ton. Traders scrambled to exploit this massive arbitrage opportunity, rerouting shipments mid-ocean and creating chaos in global supply chains. Container ships literally changed course while at sea, their captains receiving urgent orders to redirect cargo toward the higher-priced American market. "This is economic madness," declared Jonathan Price, CEO of Teck Resources, Canada's largest copper producer. "We're watching decades of integrated supply chains unravel in real time. The president just handed China a gift wrapped in protectionist paper." The mathematics of destruction were staggering. Every electric vehicle rolling off North American assembly lines requires up to 80 kilograms of copper, 4 times more than a traditional gasoline car. With the tariff in place, automakers faced an instant $220 cost increase per vehicle just from the copper component alone. Ford's procurement team sent emergency notices to suppliers warning that August invoices would reflect these crushing new costs. But the pain extended far beyond automobiles. Each mile of high-voltage transmission line contains nearly 5 tons of copper. The Biden administration's ambitious grid modernization projects suddenly faced hundreds of millions in additional costs overnight. Utility companies began drafting emergency rate hike applications, preparing to pass these expenses directly to consumers. Prime Minister Mark Carney's response was swift and unequivocal. Standing before Parliament, he declared, "Canada will not be bullied into submission. We have options, we have allies, and we have the resolve to protect our workers and our economy." Behind closed doors, his trade team was already executing contingency plans drafted months earlier when Trump first threatened aluminum tariffs. The irony was bitter. Just 10 days before the copper bombshell, Ottawa had made a major concession, scrapping its 3% digital services tax that would have raised $5.9 billion over 5 years. Canadian officials thought they'd bought peace. Instead, they'd merely delayed the inevitable confrontation. Teck Resources activated what insiders called Operation Eastern Pivot within 48 hours. The company booked warehouse space in South Korea and began negotiating long-term contracts with Asian smelters. Provincial officials from Quebec flew emergency missions to Lima and Santiago, seeking alternative buyers for Canadian concentrate. The message was clear. If America didn't want Canadian copper, Asia would gladly take it. The market response was immediate and brutal. Toronto's TSX Materials Index plunged, while shares of American copper producers like Freeport-McMoRan ticked higher. But this wasn't the clean victory protectionists had promised. UBS analysts calculated that if the premium between U.S. and global copper prices persisted through September, American manufacturers would pay an extra $4.2 billion in just one quarter, enough to slice half a percentage point off GDP growth. We're witnessing the most significant disruption to North American metals trade since the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, observed Dr. Sarah Chen, chief economist at the Peterson Institute. The president seems to believe we can simply flip a switch and produce all our copper domestically. The reality is our smelting capacity has been declining for decades. Indeed, the numbers told a sobering story. America imported 810,000 metric tons of refined copper in 2024, with domestic production meeting barely half of industrial demand. The mothballed smelters Trump hoped to revive would take years and billions in investment to restart. Hudbay Minerals' much-touted Copper World project in Arizona wouldn't produce its first pound until 2029 at the earliest. Meanwhile, on Main Street, the sticker shock was becoming real. Cox Automotive calculated that between copper, steel, and aluminum tariffs, a car built in Windsor or Monterey now carried an extra $6,000 price tag. Even Detroit-made pickups absorbed about $3,000 in metal surcharges. For American families already struggling with inflation, these weren't abstract policy debates. They were $1,000 bills arriving at the worst possible time. The housing market faced an even grimmer picture. The National Association of Home Builders reported that tariffs on metals and lumber had already lifted the cost of a new house by $17,000 to $22,000, effectively wiping out an entire down payment for first-time buyers. With copper prices soaring, those figures would only climb higher. As July 10th turned to July 11th, warehouses in New Orleans reported a 40% surge in inbound copper cathode as traders rushed to import metal before the August 1st deadline. The London Metal Exchange watched its stocks drain as every available pound flowed toward the premium-priced American market. It was a gold rush in reverse. Instead of prospectors heading to the hills, refined metal was racing to beat a ticking clock. The Chinese watched this chaos unfold with barely concealed satisfaction. Within 72 hours of Trump's announcement, Beijing's trade representatives were on planes to Vancouver, offering to purchase every pound of copper Canada couldn't sell to America. We're prepared to sign 10-year contracts at premium prices, revealed Zhang Wei, deputy director of China's Strategic Metals Reserve Bureau, during a hastily arranged press conference in Shanghai. If our American friends wish to isolate themselves from global supply chains, we're happy to fill the void. This wasn't empty rhetoric. Chinese state-owned enterprises immediately began negotiating deals worth $4.7 billion with Canadian producers, effectively capturing supply that had flowed south for generations. The speed was breathtaking. What took decades to build between USMCA partners was being dismantled and redirected to Asia in mere days. Former Federal Reserve economist Michael Patterson put it bluntly, "We just handed China control over North American copper on a silver platter. They're securing long-term supply agreements while we're creating artificial shortages. It's economic self-destruction disguised as patriotism." The ripple effects spread like wildfire through America's industrial heartland. Whirlpool's Ohio factories faced an immediate $47 million annual cost increase just from copper components in their appliances. General Electric's turbine division calculated that each wind generator would now cost an additional $185,000 to manufacture. These weren't numbers buried in quarterly reports, they were pink slips waiting to happen. By late July, the first casualties emerged. Southwire Company, America's largest wire and cable manufacturer, announced a hiring freeze affecting 7,000 workers across 6 states. Their CEO, Rich Stinson, didn't mince words. "We're being forced to choose between absorbing impossible costs or losing contracts to foreign competitors who can access cheaper copper. Either way, American workers lose." The construction industry's response was even more dramatic. Bechtel and Fluor, 2 engineering giants with combined revenues exceeding $40 billion, jointly petitioned the Commerce Department for emergency exemptions. Their message was stark. Without relief, Infrastructure projects worth $23 billion would face immediate delays or cancellations. The very roads, bridges, and power grids Trump promised to rebuild were now hostage to his own trade policy. Inside the Pentagon, alarm bells were ringing. A classified briefing revealed that defense contractors needed 47,000 metric tons of copper annually for everything from fighter jets to naval vessels. With prices skyrocketing and supply chains fragmenting, the Defense Department's procurement costs jumped by $890 million overnight. "We're compromising national security for a trade war photo op," one unnamed admiral told colleagues during a heated Joint Chiefs meeting. Canada's retaliation came swift and surgical. On July 18th, Ottawa announced export licenses would be required for all critical minerals shipments to the United States, effective immediately. The bureaucratic weapon was devastating in its simplicity. Every pound of Canadian nickel, lithium, and rare earth elements would now face potential delays and denials. For American battery manufacturers dependent on Canadian materials, it was like watching their supply chains evaporate in slow motion. "Make no mistake, we didn't want this fight," Prime Minister Carney told a packed press gallery. "But if Washington insists on treating its closest ally as an adversary, we'll respond accordingly. Our minerals will find eager buyers in Europe and Asia." The European Union seized the opportunity with both hands. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen flew to Ottawa personally, offering Canada immediate inclusion in the EU's Critical Raw Materials Act. The deal promised European investment in Canadian mines, guaranteed purchase agreements, and technology transfers. Everything America was now denying its northern neighbor. Back in New York, the London Metal Exchange reported its most volatile trading week in history. Copper premiums swung wildly as algorithms struggled to price in political risk. Hedge funds lost a combined $3.2 billion in 3 days as their models, trained on decades of stable North American trade, imploded spectacularly. Renaissance Technologies' flagship Medallion Fund, usually a bastion of mathematical precision, posted its worst monthly performance since 2008. The copper tariff crisis devastated communities and industries. In Thompson, Manitoba, job losses loomed as copper mining halted. In Arizona, investors abandoned the 7-beta Resolution copper project, eyeing Peru instead. U.S. manufacturers paid $1.8 billion in tariffs in August alone, sparking outrage. Tesla moved battery production to Shanghai, Apple delayed iPhones, and John Deere shifted to Brazil. The S&P 500 materials sector tanked, and Goldman Sachs cut GDP forecasts. Diplomatically, U.S. credibility eroded at the G20. By late September, inflation fears and looming recession signaled disaster. A policy meant to protect U.S. industry had become its own worst enemy.